I work the graveyard shift at a local shipping warehouse. Most of my job is counting inventory, making sure all shipments and items are accounted for and are tracked through the whole organizing process. Every once in a while, I'll have a coworker on the same shift as me, but usually, it's just me. This night was no different than any other. I got to the warehouse and checked in with my manager. He locked up the place and left me to it. I started doing my typical routine, checking all the shipments that came in during the day. As I did, and about an hour into my shift, I passed by a door that I noticed was cracked open like it was closed, but just not latched into the doorway, so it was sticking out a little bit. This specific door was on the back of the building, usually where truckers would enter from. I opened it and looked out, seeing an empty and quiet lot outside behind the warehouse. Nothing really to see at all. I figured my manager must have just forgotten to lock it. I didn't have the key to any of these sort of side access doors, so I couldn't lock it or anything. But honestly, I didn't really care. It just wasn't a big deal, at least not for me. I shut it behind me and went back to counting inventory. I was working pretty quick, getting through a decent amount and making it to the next aisle of shelves, when, just from the corner of my eye, it looked like something moved at the far end of the hallway. I immediately looked up, but nothing was there. What it looked like, again from the side of my vision, was someone running across the opening of the hallway back there. I thought it had to be some weird trick my mind was playing on me, but it still got my heart pumping for a moment. I shook my head and rubbed my eyes, wondering what was up with me. I debated whether or not to check on it, but initially, I decided not to, just because it would slow down my workflow to walk all the way down there, and because I was 99% sure it was nothing. Things like this happen all the time. Thinking you see something in the corner of your eye, and every other time, it ends up being nothing. So why would this be any different? But as the minutes passed, I couldn't shake the small feeling that it could have been someone. I sighed, somewhat disappointed in myself for being so unnerved by this, and walked down to the end of the hallway. This section I never really go to because it has nothing to do with my job. It has just a bunch of shelves full of large pallets, already prepped to be shipped out of the warehouse. Because I don't work in there, most of the lights were off. I just stood in the hallway and looked into the large, dark room for a few seconds, waiting to see if I saw anything move, but nothing did. I left the hallway and went back to work in the same spot I was before. I don't know if it was because of that small situation, but it felt like I just got hit by a wave of exhaustion. Suddenly, I was tired and not wanting to work as quickly as I was just a few minutes before all this happened. I wanted to finish this aisle before taking my break, though, so I kept working. But not even 5 minutes passed before I suddenly noticed something in the side of my vision again. I jolted my eyes toward the end of the hallway. I swear it looked like a figure or someone was leaning out from behind the corner, like they were watching me. But now nothing was there. This time, I immediately dropped what I was doing and hurried to the end of the hallway again. Though it was dark and I really didn't see anything at all, I called out, not really expecting any response, but figured it was worth a try. Hello. I waited a few seconds, then walked further into the room. It was so quiet, every step I took echoed all the way through the warehouse. I stopped about halfway through and looked around. As I stood there, I felt an incredibly disturbing and unsettling feeling of being watched, and not being able to see anything only made it worse. I hurried back to where I came from, making it to the other end of the hallway before I glanced back one more time. The darkness in that room gave me chills. I started to walk away to go back to work when a sudden, extremely loud thud rang through the warehouse. It was metallic, like someone banging metal against one of the large shelving units. Afterward, there were a few seconds of silence, only filled by the faint echoes lingering through the room, before there was another thud, quieter this time, like a repeated tapping against the metal shelf. It was like they were trying to get my attention to lure me back into the dark room. But knowing this had to be a person now and being completely horrified, I ran away. I went to the back door and out into the parking lot. After making it a safe distance, I called for help. I really didn't expect much from the police, at least not right away. But surprisingly, when they went in, they found someone hiding behind one of the large shelves in the dark room. It was a man in his 40s with a very disheveled and creepy look, but even more creepy is that when they reviewed the security footage, they found him walking around the outside of the building several times throughout the last week and going around checking all the doors to see if they were. And like all of these nights, I was alone inside the warehouse, sometimes just on the other side of the door from him. From the short amount that I saw him get dragged out of the warehouse and into the cop car, the guy seemed pretty unhinged and crazy. I don't know if they ever really figured out what he was trying to do, but just thinking about him trying to lure me into the room still makes me really uneasy. When I was in college, I worked part-time overnight shifts at my parents' 24/7 laundromat. It was just some dinky place on the edge of town. The building I had always found surprisingly creepy for what it was. Something about the place being really old and the machines constantly humming in the background was just unsettling. I still thought it was better working at a place my parents owned over anywhere else. Though, this was a Friday, which was the only day I worked a full overnight shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I took over from my dad. He left me some snacks in the back room and told me the usual, to call and wake him if I needed anything. There were still a few customers trickling in for the next hour, so I stayed behind the counter and made sure it all ran smoothly. By midnight, everyone was gone and all the machines were left empty. I waited behind the counter for another 15 minutes, just sitting on my phone and waiting a bit longer before doing any of the cleaning tasks. But during that time, a customer walked in. I looked up and was pretty confused. He had nothing with him, like no clothes or laundry of any kind, and he had a thick hoodie with the hood over his head and hands in his pockets. I said, "Hello," but he didn't look at me or say anything back. He just walked in and slowly made his way through the aisles of washers and dryers, kind of looking around, I guess, before going back to the entrance and leaving out the doors. I couldn't help but watch him as he left and walked out into the parking lot. He didn't get into any car or anything. He just crossed the street and went out of sight. It is not every day someone walks into a laundromat in the middle of the night for no reason and just walks around. I guess he didn't technically do anything wrong, but I felt really weird about it. Being alone in there definitely didn't help. I think if other customers were inside, I would have felt safer for sure and maybe not even noticed anything. With nothing to do about it, though, I just started doing my cleaning tasks. As I cleaned, the only reason I could think of for the guy coming in and walking around was that maybe he was looking for a lost clothing item that he might have dropped earlier in the day. It was a stretch, considering the obvious thing to do would be to ask me if I had seen it, but he didn't. That is pretty much all I thought about for the next 20-ish minutes as I walked around and cleaned off all the counters and tittied up the place. At some point, though, I happened to look up from what I was doing, and standing right outside the entrance was the guy from before. I almost didn't even realize it was a person behind the glass because he was wearing all black. And of course, it was dark outside. By the time I did and recognized him, he had started walking away already. How long was he standing there watching me for? After a few moments, I went up to the door and got as close as I could to look down the storefront. But the guy was already gone. I couldn't even see where he went. Something about his appearance and the eerie way he was just showing up was really creepy and didn't make me feel comfortable at all. I thought about calling my dad, but I would have felt horrible waking him up and having him take over my shift just because of some guy I thought was slightly suspicious. I knew my dad wouldn't give me a hard time about it, but I was still in my first couple of months working there and wanted to prove I was reliable. I stayed on the lookout for the next hour, pretty much sitting behind the counter and staring out the front windows the whole time. After more and more time passed, though, and with still no customers coming in at all, I slowly started to pay less attention. I was on my phone for a while, just trying to wait out the time. until there were a couple short creak sounds from the back of the building. I got up and walked a few steps toward the back, trying to listen. I could hear what sounded like shuffling around or someone moving things in one of the back rooms. I only listened for a few seconds before knowing someone was back there and realizing I needed to leave. I turned and quietly moved to the front door, preparing to call the cops and pushing on it to leave. But the door got stuck. It wouldn't open. I looked down, seeing through the glass that something was around the handles on the outside of the door. I immediately realized that is what the man was doing outside the building when I saw him standing by the door watching me. My whole body filled with panic. There was only one back exit door. I started very quietly stepping closer to the back room, still hearing them moving stuff around back there, but definitely doing so in a careful way, as if they were trying to be quiet about it. When I got to the doorway and looked in, I saw him. His back was facing me as he was searching through some of the boxes on the floor. Then I looked at the exit. This was my chance. I sprinted for the door. The man immediately shifted around and saw me. I got to the door, and for a moment, my heart sank. There was some makeshift looking rope tied around the handle, like he was trying to tie it shut. Fortunately, whatever he did didn't work, and I was still able to force it open and make a run for it. As soon as I was out of the building, the man came out too, but now out in the open. He didn't chase me, he just made a run for it. My dad and police came, but there wasn't a lot of leads on where he could have gone to. Clearly, that man was trying to trap me inside with him. I am assuming he was trying to do it sneakily, but had to look around for something to help tie down the back exit door, which ultimately allowed me to escape when I did. His intentions were likely horrifying, and now, replaying the whole night back, it feels crazy that I didn't notice anything was really wrong until the last minute. At least now I am 1,000 times more aware when I am working alone, never trusting anyone to be truly harmless because I know if the man was successful in locking the back door, there would have been no escape for me. For a few years, I had a gig at a private company as a data entry clerk. It was your typical low-tier job that wasn't too well respected at the workplace. The managers were constantly adding on more and more work that I was even supposed to be doing under the data entry title, but I was young and this was my first real job, so I just went with it. Now, the office was on the 5th and top floor of a large office building in a small business center, situated in the suburbs right outside of the city. Our company only had the 5th floor, and the other floors were rented out to different businesses. As far as I knew, all these other businesses were service-based, so their offices would empty out by 5 or 6 every night. Ours was the only one that sometimes had people work later, as the data entry clerk and basically doing every other odd job as well. I was often the one to stay late some nights with whatever busy work that needed to be done. I made the least at the company, so paying me to work extra hours past closing wasn't a big deal to them. This night, my boss gave me a bunch of stuff to get done. He didn't even ask if I could stay late. He just assumed I was good for it, and me being the pushover I was at the time, I just went with it. The extra money always helped, and with the office empty, I actually enjoyed the work better, not having to be under the stress of being watched and micromanaged all day. So, come 6 o'clock, everyone else started heading home, and I stayed to continue working. After 30 minutes, the main lights in the building turned off, leaving just the low power saving lights on. I sat at the computer, going through the motions and working at a comfortable pace for me. About 3 full hours went by. The building was dark and quiet, and I had just been focused on my work, when suddenly, I heard something below me. Obviously, with the massive building and all the rooms in it, the sound was very muffled and echoey, but I thought it sounded like a door opening or closing. I looked up from my computer for a few seconds, listening to try and figure out what it could have been, but not hearing anything else. I just got back to work. I really didn't think about it all that much. I didn't think it was actually likely that it was a door that I heard, and it was probably just the building settling and creaking. I didn't hear anything afterward either to warrant me to think any more about it. After that, I want to say 30 to 45 minutes passed, I had finished nearly all of the work I needed to get done. I think I only had about an hour worth of stuff to get done before I could head home. It was getting pretty well into the night, though, and I felt my eyes getting sleepy. So I got up to grab a small cup of coffee from the Keurig that the office had by the entrance. I headed over and started the brew, and I don't know how I didn't notice it the whole walk up to the coffee station. But when I walked back to my desk, coffee in hand, I realized that the door to the hallway was open. This was the one in the back of the room that led to just the utility closet and the staircase. That goes down to the other floors. That door was always closed because basically nobody uses it. Curious, I walked over to the doorway and just poked my head out and looked around. I saw the door to the staircase and the door to the closet, both closed and showing no signs of anything. As I was over there, though, I did feel a chill run through me and kind of fill me with an uneasy feeling. I thought it was probably just because of the dim lighting of that hallway. Though, at night, it was kind of dark and pretty creepy. I went up to the door to the staircase and looked through it, just double checking. Then went back into the room and closed the door behind me, heading back to my desk. I just had an hour of work left. If I could just get it done and get out of here, then there was no need to worry about anything. That door being open was really strange, though, and I knew there was no reason anyone should be coming up here or would have come up here and not said anything. I tried to keep working, doing my best to get it done quickly, but it was hard. Every couple minutes, I'd get that unnerving feeling that I was being watched. I'd lift my head up from the screen and look around, only to see nothing. It started bothering me because I knew it was taking away from my focus and making everything take longer. But at the same time, the feeling was so strong, I couldn't help but look up every time. This went on for 30 minutes. But then, as I was looking at the screen, everything around me went dark. All the dim overhead lights just suddenly shut off. Only the pale white computer screen illuminated the area around me. Everything else was pitch black. I immediately swung my head toward the other side of the room where I knew the light switches were, standing up to hurry over there, but stopped before I could even take a step. In the silence of the building, I could hear the soft, slow footsteps of someone walking from the direction, one after the other, walking closer and closer to me from the darkness, past the illumination of the computer screen. I listened, frozen in fear, for a few seconds before my adrenaline pulsed through me, and I ran from my desk. I went straight for the door to the staircase. I made it to the hallway and into the staircase, where finally there was some light. I didn't stop running until I got to the first floor and out of the building, obviously. Then I called 911. I stood in the cold outside the building for nearly 15 minutes before an officer arrived, and then waited another 5 minutes for 2 more officers before they finally searched the building. And by then, they found no one inside. Just as frustrating, it took 2 days to get the security footage, and yet it wasn't all that helpful anyway. The building was old and had a 30-year-old security system that was in black and white and really pixelated and blurry, too much so to see anything. All they knew is the person entered the building around 2 p.m., saying he had an appointment with one of the other companies. Then he pretty much right away hid in the utility closet until everyone left except for me. He walked around for a while until he noticed I was still there, and at that point, it's not clear what he was trying to do or what he wanted. Maybe he was just trying to scare me out of the office, or maybe he had a more sinister intention. Without any real conclusion, though, I decided to quit afterward. I'm really glad I did for a lot of reasons, but not having to be alone in that building after that incident was a big one, especially knowing he still has never been found.